Okay, hi, I'm Lyndon Dowdle,
And I'm Gretchen Sturgill.
and this is week 14. And this week we read Search for Common Ground, chapter 5, and this is by Pedro and Frederick. And so this chapter basically was talking about testing and standardized testing, and how testing is not like a good, accurate representation of students and their understanding of what they're being taught in their schools. And there's not really a real way of trying to test a student to see how they're doing. Um, Testing sometimes is inaccurate based off of like how they're feeling that day or what they're being tested on. Um, and so, yeah, Pedro and Frederick just kind of went back and forth about how testing shouldn't be like the main way of how students are admitted into college and tested on who they are like as a student.
hmm Yeah, and they're talking a lot about how testing scores should be used more to kind of see where a student needs help instead of like trying to grade a student with their test scores. It should be more for the teacher's use to see like, okay, this is where I need to do better on, making sure these students are understanding this concept or this is where this specific individual needs more help. Kind of like a doctor visit is what they compare it to, where like, you go in and they tell you like if you're healthy or like what might need some help. They're not like ranking you, and tests shouldn't be used to rank students. And also, like, a big problem with standardized testing that happens at like, the end of the year or whatever is that those test scores aren't coming back until like 6 months later. So it's really not very helpful for the students or for the teacher because it's like so separated from when they're actually learning that it's like, okay, there's not really anything that's being learned from this because it's so far away. And yeah, if tests were treated the same as doctor visits, then the parents would also be more inclined to have their children take them. They talked a lot about parents opting out of having their children take tests because they don't see the value in it. And if the tests were kind of redone a little bit to just, and there's like an understanding between teachers and parents about this is to see where your kid needs help, then the parents would like more likely have their students take the tests.
Yeah. And they were also mentioning about how students with more money they put that money towards tutoring for the SAT or ACT, and that gap it bridges like or it makes a bigger gap because students with more money are going to do better on the test because they're getting trained on like how the testing system works rather than like what the content is really saying. And those with no like low income families or like low income schools don't have those options for tutoring, and so therefore it like makes a gap of the testing. And with the standardized testing, they were saying that it's not necessarily based really on content. It's just on like how well can you take a test, which just seems a little skewed to base someone's testing score off of like how well they take a test. Um, and yeah, like they were just basically saying like towards the end, like if we focus too much on scores, it loses the whole reason why they're even taking a test is like to help the the student just in general succeed in life. But some schools and like the states are all just too focused on test scores and like getting them to be higher. And it shouldn't limit the student like to who they are and their potential of succeeding in school.
Mm-hmm.
So
They did talk a little bit about an alternative to like standardized testing, like a portfolio system, instead of like, the 8 hour long test, where they kind of gather different work or quizzes, things like that from throughout the year and see how a student is progressing rather than how they score on an individual test. If you kind of take a look at like, okay, this is where the student started out and this is how they like we can see improvement throughout the year. That would be better than like just a test. But they did talk a little bit about how that's hard because that's very open to like varying how different teachers or administrations decide to run that portfolio system. There's not necessarily a set way to like make it, the same across the board. Every teacher's gonna grade a portfolio system differently, which is kind of the problem for that. That is like a pro of a standardized test is that it's like it's a standardized test. Every like it's gonna be the same for everybody. There's not like opinions when grading it. But they
yeah.
did talk about the No Child Left Behind Act and the Every Child Succeeds Act that like um it initially like made these standardized tests a thing with the intent to like, make it so that no child was like just getting forgotten about, but in reality it just kind of made the problems worse because it's not helping the kids at all. And yeah, I don't really know if there's anything else.
No, yeah. I felt like the portfolio is a good segue into like what I wanted to talk about for application. I don't know about you, but for me, like that really stuck out to me. The portfolio, I feel like that was a good way to gauge like where students are is by gathering different things, like maybe use a test, but not make it like that's it. And so that's something I definitely want to incorporate is like try to gather students like projects and quizzes and even homework assignments. I feel like that really gauges like when they're sitting down focusing. And it's like not a lot of pressure. You can really see like what they understand or not. Um, and then if I were to make tests, I probably wouldn't make them longer than like 15, 30 minutes, especially at such a young age, because that's just a lot of pressure to have students sit there and be focused the whole time. And then giving them feedback and like make a plan with that student so that they can improve in like that certain area. I feel like that would be way more effective than just handing them a standardized test and say, there you go, like good luck. So,
Yeah, and kind of the same thing. It's just like using tests as a way to just see where students are at rather than like trying to, see if they're doing like ranking them as a class or whatever. Just really being able to use that as like, okay, this is where I need to help these students. This is where I need to help the class as a whole. Because you can also see if like the whole class is not scoring well on something, then that falls back on the teacher. That's clearly a mistake that the teacher made, something to reevaluate. And then also, I think by doing that, like if the students understood that a test was not something that makes or breaks their grade, it's actually something that's supposed to help me help them, then there'd be more effort put into the test. Because like I think a lot of the times students can go in with a mindset where it's like, oh, I don't know this content, so I'm just not going to try, which makes things worse. And that like kind of like we were talking about, it's hard to really see how hard someone was trying on a test or if they're failing their best. But if they just know that this test doesn't actually like define their grade and it's really just going to help them in the long run, then that could like produce more effort and better results as well. And also build trust with parents so that the parents also know that these tests are to help their students. And so then their parents are more likely to not opt out of their kids taking these tests. And yeah, I really like the portfolio thing as well. Maybe not like the whole grade should be a portfolio system, but like there's definitely a place for a portfolio system where it's like good to see how a child is improving.
yeah, I like what you said about not making tests like helping them understand that their overall grade shouldn't be based on a test. I think that's something that we can do as teachers is like in the grade book, we don't have to make tests like the biggest weighted part of their grade. So yeah, I really like that. But yeah, do you want to move into reflection?
Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, so for reflection, yeah, I just felt like it was a really good read. I just agree with Pedro and Frederick. I feel like they agreed a lot on this subject, and I would have to agree that testing shouldn't define like an individual and their school and like their education. Um, and yeah, like I don't know, I felt like a lot of pressure taking the ACT, and that's like a reason why I didn't get into BYU the first time because my scores were horrible and I didn't have like access to tutoring like some of those students did. And so I don't know, I wish that things would change because I feel like I do really well when it comes to school and homework and classes, but when it comes to tests, like that's what always ruins my grades. So
mhm. Yeah, I feel like I'm kind of the opposite. I'm definitely someone who like kind of benefits from like a standardized test in a way because I feel like I am a pretty good test taker and I recognize that about myself. But I also like know that when I'm taking this test, it's like doesn't actually show like what I know. I just know kind of how to like have to like read the system or whatever. And yeah, I liked a lot about what it said and kind of just like since this is our last recording, just like looking back on the whole book as a whole, I feel like there's a lot more like common ground between Pedro and Frederick than I like initially thought there would be when I kind of started reading the book. I thought they'd be a lot more divided, but it turns out that on a lot of these topics, like they had a lot of the same opinions and a lot of the same ideas and were able to help each other like see other sides of things in a good, mature way. And that just like shows that if you're open to having like thoughtful and genuine conversation with someone, then you can find that common ground and like you can be able to help each other understand something better.
yeah, okay.